Do you like any of these lessons or tutorials? You can download all of my content at Teachers Pay Teachers. You can find a link in the description below. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram for some awesome photography. Hey, what's up, everybody? Hope y'all are having fun. Hope y'all are being safe. I have a vocabulary assignment for you, and this vocabulary assignment is all about photography. The terms that we're going to go over are terms that are used when editing photos. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This particular photo is a raw photo. It's unedited, and we're going to be looking at this photo in several different ways. As we go through each term, we're going to look at the variances of what each term does to a photograph, and we're going to use this picture over and over and over to see what it does. Okay, here's the list. There's 12 terms. We're going to go through each one of these individually. And so let's go ahead and get started. So the first term, temperature. In photography, temperature comes from the light source that was actually present during the moment the photograph was taken. So here's some science facts for you. Low temperatures emit warmer colors, like our star, the sun, which is yellow and orange in color. And higher temperatures, well, they emit cooler colors, like blue. And Rigel is the sixth brightest star near us, and that's why it's blue. It's very high in temperature. But in editing software like Adobe Lightroom, you can change the temperature as desired. So you can see here on the left hand side we've got the cooler temperatures, and oppositely to that on the right hand side you have your warmer temperatures. Next up on the list is tint. Now the standard definition of tint is when a color becomes lightened up along by adding white to the hue. Okay, so I teach this all the time, that tint is adding white to the hue. But in photography it's a little bit different. Why is it that in Lightroom you have green and magenta under the tint slider? Well, in photography, fluorescent lights, they tend to produce a green overcast, and occasionally reflections will produce a green overcast depending on the amount of trees and grass you have in the background. So you can compensate for this overabundance of green by adding magenta, and that's why it's added to the tint slider in Lightroom. So you can see here on the left hand side we got the green tint. The photos that are in the middle, they're all going to be unedited raw photos as we saw at the beginning. And on the right hand side you have your magenta tint. So moving on, exposure. Now exposure is a big deal in photography, but we're working on post-production right now. And so exposure is basically just the amount of light that hits your camera's sensor. You can control your exposure by adjusting your ISO, shutter speed, and even aperture size. You can do all this within your camera settings. So photos that are underexposed and photos that are overexposed. These types of photos are not the kind of photos people enjoy viewing. They're either too dark or too bright, as you can see here. On the left-hand side, we have a photo that's underexposed. And on the right-hand side, we have a photo that's overexposed. Now, contrast. In photography, contrast is simply the difference of tones and colors. But what that means is that there are two types of contrast. Now you have one, which is tonal contrast, which is what we're going to be using in our editing software. And then you have a second type of contrast, which is the color contrast. Just like clarity, contrast can sharpen up an image. And here's a quick hint concerning tonal contrast. Think about all the different ranges of true whites and true blacks that are in the photograph. So here on the left-hand side, we have light contrast. And on the right-hand side, we have some darker contrast. Okay, moving on. Highlights. Now, in photography, highlights are just the elements within the photograph that are the brightest features of that photograph. Highlights are created by the light source or light sources that were present at the time and place the photograph was taken. So dropping the highlights in your editing software can bring back some of the color that is lost in the brightness, and what that does is it recovers lost detail. You get a lot of good results with clouds while dropping the highlights. So here's another quick hint. Are your pictures highlights always too bright, but you've already adjusted your camera settings all that you could, but you keep getting the same results? Well, you could try using a graduated neutral density filter or an ND filter. This is a tool that you can just snap onto your camera lens. It's readily available and kind of cheap and kind of expensive depending on your level of taste. So here on the left hand side we have low highlights, and on the right hand side we have some high highlights. Okay, shadows. In photography, shadows are the elements within a photograph that are the darkest features of that photograph. Now, shadows are created with the variances in lighting and exposure. Shadows can also generate dramatic effects to your photographs by creating depth of field. Be warned though, don't confuse shadows with blacks. Notice that shadows are subtle when compared to blacks. For instance, in photography, blacks are not the darkest elements found within photographs. Shadows are. However, editing blacks in photography can add way more darkness to your photo than shadows ever will. So you can see here on the left hand side we have some low shadows, and on the right hand side we have some high shadows. Next up on the list, whites. The whites editing tool helps photographers determine the true whites in their photographs, and it allows them to adjust those whites. So in other words, how bright do you want your photograph to be? This is the tool that you want to use. Whites and blacks are basically opposites of each other, and this is just an additional tool that allows photographers to control the post manipulation of the exposure in their photographs. So on the left hand side we have some low whites, and on the right hand side we have some high whites. I like saying that, high whites. Alright, next up we have blacks. So the blacks editing tool helps photographers determine their true blacks in the photographs they take, and it allows them to adjust those blacks. More specifically, blacks allows photographers to adjust their darkest tones in their pictures, regardless if those tones are true black or not. This is just an additional tool that allows photographers to control post manipulation of their exposure in their pictures. So on the left hand side we have some low blacks, and on the right hand side we have some high blacks. Okay, moving on. Clarity. So clarity is a photo enhancement feature, and it's found in most editing programs. Now when you adjust the clarity, you're actually just adjusting the midtones in your picture, and when you do this, you reveal texture that may have been hidden within the photograph. Now, just like contrast, clarity can sharpen up an image. However, too much of anything can be bad, so remember to make subtle adjustments when editing your photos. On the left hand side we have some low clarity, and on the right hand side we have some high clarity. Next up, dehaze. Now, photographers can use the dehaze tool to add or reduce atmospheric haze, which is typically caused by mist or fog, but mist or fog tends to cover up the details of your picture. It hides the emphasizing components of the subject in your photograph, and you can easily get rid of the fog in your photos by adjusting the dehaze slider. Now the dehaze slider is similar to contrast and clarity because you can use this tool to bring back those details I've been talking about. You can add depth perception to your pictures by adjusting your dehaze slider. So for example, on the left hand side we have some higher dehaze, And on the right hand side, we have some low dehaze. Moving on, Vibrance. Now, the Vibrance tool manipulates the concentration of muted colors in photographs, but it does not entirely affect the other colors that are higher in saturation. So the Vibrance slider gives a subtle adjustment to color, but the effects are not as intense when compared to saturation. Now, photographers can utilize this tool to correct skin tones, and they can do this without completely affecting all the other colors that are in the background. So we have some low vibrance on the left-hand side. You can see that there's still some color to the photo. And we have some high vibrance on the right-hand side. And the colors are really popping forward. Next up is saturation. So the saturation tool is used to manipulate the intensity of all the colors in photographs. So you have high saturation and low saturation. High saturation creates a vivid photograph with intensified colors. Low saturation creates a grayscaled photo which is lacking color altogether. And here's a quick editing tip. This tool is very delicate, okay, and it should be used sparingly. Too much of anything can be bad, and too much saturation can make your photograph appear excessively edited. So here on the left-hand side, we have a low saturation, and on the right-hand side, we have high saturation. Notice the left side has no color at all, and the right-hand side is completely saturated with color. Okay, next up, the bonus term. Did you notice the WB at the top near the term temperature? Well, it stands for white balance, and white balance is near the temperature slider because it actually has a lot to do with the temperature. Have you ever looked at one of your photos and they appeared to have this yellow haze? Well, adjusting the white balance will make your photo appear more realistic, like how you've seen it in real life the day you took it. This is the final edit. There is some Photoshop in here and a lot of different editing tools that we did not go over today, but we've been looking at this photo this whole time, so I thought I would show you the final edit, and I thought it came out kind of nice. All right, well, that concludes today's assignment. I hope y'all actually learned something today. Don't forget, if you're defining these terms, that you want to paraphrase. And all that means is don't copy and paste. Rewrite the answers in your own words, and then it'll be more meaningful. Plus, you don't have to worry about plagiarism. I hope that y'all have a great day. Remember to be safe. If you liked this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button down below, as it will help my channel grow. I do plan on posting more videos surrounding photography, videography, tutorials, and vlogs. Alright, so I'll see y'all in the next one.